Hello, good evening, everybody. Senator Murphy and I were saying before in the green room that it really is a committed group of people who are here today with us when the weather is so beautiful outside. So thank you for being with us today. Senator Murphy, welcome to Chicago.
Yeah, this is how the weather is every day in Chicago,
Yes.
right?
Every day for the last 2 days.
Good, okay,
Yeah.
good.
So we're here to discuss your book, Crisis of the Common Good, and there's a lot to unpack in it, and I look forward to getting to it all. Before we start with that, I'd love you to tell us a little bit about yourself, things that we would not know from the time you've been in Senate. We know your voting record, et cetera, but tell us about you before we jump into the book.
Oh, that's a great question, a very generous question.
I will cut you off if you take too long.
Well, first of all, let me just say thank you to all of our partners to WBEZ for the great work that you do, to the theater, to our bookseller. Zeenat, great to be here with you, not the first room we've been in together, and just really generous of all of you to spend some of your time talking about this book that I've written. About me, probably the most important thing about me is that I'm a dad. I talk about both of my sons in the context of this book. One is 17, a high school junior. The other is 14, a middle schooler. I spend as much time as I can with them. I grew up in Connecticut, the state that I represent. People ask me, how did you get involved in politics? And I explain that I was just kind of an organizer by birth, that I organized the touch football games in my neighborhood. I organized the protest of the dress code at my high school when it was onerous and in need of reform. And then somebody told me, and my mother sort of told me, she grew up very, very poor in public housing in a town next door to where we grew up, and she told me that I had to do something with my life to give back. And then somewhere in my teenage years, I discovered this world called politics, in which you got to organize for a living, and you also got to make the world a better place. And so I started getting involved at a very young age, ran for office at a very young age, and have always found this job to be tremendously honorable. So I'm first a dad. That's why I stay in this business, to try to leave a better place for my kids, but I have really been privileged to have been able to do this work for a long time.
Were there other careers you considered?
I mean, after professional baseball player was ruled out at age 9, I did not. Actually, here's a funny story. Because I'm an organizer, I loved big, complicated things, and I always wondered how they got organized. And actually, this is a Chicago story. I remember maybe my first big plane flight and flying through O'Hare and being in this airport and being just mesmerized by how it worked. And I actually remember thinking, maybe that's my destiny. Maybe my destiny is to be an airport administrator. And so yes, so my 3 potential careers were professional baseball player, airport administrator, or U.S. Senator.
Well, listen, we're glad you chose the one, and the people chose the one that you ended up being. Now, the book came out this week, so I would say not many of you have read it, if any of you, but hopefully you will. And it's structured around these 6 cults that you think have eroded what has comprised this idea of common good that we had in our country. And that is the cult of profit, of globalism, technology, consumption, credentialism, and corruption. And you say that they've hollowed out something fundamental, that our sense that we're in this together, that we actually owe each other something, is gone, and that it's not Donald Trump that is the cause of this, but he's a symptom of decades of choices that both parties made. Can you tell us, why did you write this book now, and what did you learn in the process of writing it?
Yeah, it's a great question. So as I saw Donald Trump coming for the second time, it begged this fundamental question. Why is this country choosing someone so reckless, so dangerous, knowing exactly who he is after his first term a second time? And it seemed obvious that there was something spiritually rotten in the country that had made us feel so alone, so powerless, so exhausted, that we were as a country willing to elect somebody so far out of the mainstream, someone that came with a story of scapegoating and blame, a theory for us to understand why we were feeling the way that we were feeling. And I think everybody can plug into that. You do know that this country feels like it's been unspooling a bit for decades, that people are lonelier, that people are more exhausted, that they wake up every day without a clear sense of purpose and identity. And when people are feeling that way, they want easy answers. And Trump gave you easy answers. You know, the person to blame for your loneliness, for your lack of power in your economic life, it's an immigrant, it's a Muslim, it's a drag show. And so I think that if we really want to move beyond Donald Trump, it's not enough to just beat him at the ballot box. We've got to ask some hard questions about how our culture has become so corrupted, how we have lost a sense of the common good as a priority, right? This idea, as I wrote, that we have an obligation to each other, not just to ourselves. And so this book is structured, it's a way to think about that spiritual crisis. It's a book that organizes a set of thoughts that might help you understand how we ended up with this guy. I chose the structure of cults because what are cults? Cults are a system of false beliefs that accrue to the benefit of one person or a handful of people, the leaders of these cults. And so I try to talk about these systems of false beliefs that aren't true, but that serve someone, and how piercing those cults, the cult of profit, the cult of technology, the cult of consumerism, really is the key to fully being able to move beyond this moment in time where this country is captured by a divisive demagogue.
So can we talk about the cult of profit? And
Yeah.
you know, we'll try to get to all of them, but you start the book with this story about how your son's Little League game has been, or Little League youth hockey, organization has been bought by private equity, and what that means for the games. No, it's unbelievable. Will you tell that story?
Yeah. So my son loves hockey. It's his favorite sport. But the first line in this book is that my 14-year-old son loves hockey but is not going to play hockey professionally. And so in an earlier interview, somebody was like, that's a really bold choice to open the book by trashing your 14-year-old son. But he's not. He's not. But he plays in a youth hockey league where he plays 60 games a year. And he plays in a league where the parents are prohibited from live streaming the games for the grandparent or the other parent that's not at the game. I remember discovering this when I saw one of the other parents sort of sheepishly standing in the dark corner of the rink live streaming the game for his wife who couldn't make it. And I asked, why don't you go find a better place? And he said, no, we're prohibited. You don't know this? We're prohibited from recording these games. And I said, why is that? And he said, well, this league we play in is owned by a private equity-backed company, and they've installed their own streaming service that you have to pay for if you want to watch the games, up to $50 a month, just to be able to watch your grandson play hockey. Youth sports is being bought and sold back to us. And I opened the book with that story because it speaks to something spiritually bankrupt in the country. This idea that everything not nailed down is being turned into a commodity, that everything is being run for profit, that there's nothing that just exists in the public commons any longer, that is just run for the benefit of the community, for kids, for families. Even youth sports has become a commodity. I talk about this cult of profit, the idea that the only measure of a good company today is how much profit it makes, not how it treats its workers, not the social value of the product, not how it treats its communities, just whether it makes a profit. And it leaves us feeling so cold that that's the only thing that matters in our economy. It leaves us worse off. My kids shouldn't play 60 games a year. And so that's the reason I start the book with that story.
That is the only thing that matters, and that we're not benefiting from it either, that somebody else is.
Somebody else is. Yeah, I mean, my kid gets benefit from this league, but he shouldn't have to play that many games, and I should certainly be able to go through this important parental ritual of recording your son's game and sharing it with relatives without having to pay for that.
Yeah. in the book you write that, the only way we will have solutions to these problems is if government, civil society, individuals kind of all participate and play a part, and we'll talk about that. But you also write about this idea of social cohesion and the places and spaces that we get together in society to be with one another, be with people who are different than us, and what that meant for the common good. Can you talk about that a little?
Yeah, this book, again, is about spiritualism, and I don't mean religiosity. I mean, how do you find your place in the world? How do you find purpose and meaning and happiness? Because in a country devoid of those things, again, a demagogue has opportunities to take hold. One of the ways that you find your purpose, maybe the primary way that people have found their purpose and meaning in life over the millennia, is a sense of rootedness, a sense of being part of a community. Family is obviously the first place that you find that, but you also find that in your neighborhood. And we have constructed a economy and a culture in which you're told to just be satisfied being a citizen of the world. And we have purposefully atrophied institutions, from churches to civic groups to labor unions, where you might find community, where you might find that shared purpose. It feels kind of lonely to not belong to any group other than your family. It feels kind of empty to not have local commerce where you find community and just all shop at the same antiseptic national, international retailers. So the second chapter in this book is called The Cult of Everywhere, the idea that you are a citizen of everywhere and nowhere at the same time, and why we have to build, once again, intentionally, unique, connected communities with strong institutions that you can belong to as a way of giving people an identity in the place that they live in, an identity that will make them feel rooted and thus happier and more content than they are when they live in the world.
In the book, you point to Governor Spencer Cox as somebody who has done this well. And did you engage, or you went to go see what is going on in Utah? And what was that like?
Yeah, so throughout this book, I make the concurrent claim, not just that we have to build a culture, an economy, and a government of the common good, but that this isn't as hard as you would think, because there's a lot of folks on the right and the left who hate the fact that our towns have become less healthy places. There are a lot of folks on the right who think that capitalism is cold and extractive. There's opportunity to work, maybe not right now in the United States Senate across the aisle while Trump has captured the place, but out there in the public, there's an ability to reach across the aisle. So I did this with Spencer Cox. He's the Republican governor of Utah. He has spent more time than most Republicans thinking about loneliness. Utah actually passed one of the strongest laws to combat and protect kids from harm on social media of any state in the nation. And I said, listen, can we talk about this? Can we talk about the things we can agree on when it comes to the question of how you build stronger communities? And we actually created a little working group. We called it something like the Project for the Common Good. And we brought together a bunch of left and right thinkers to, scheme on some ideas that weren't particularly political or partisan. And it's one of the things that gave me hope that this conversation about rebuilding communitarianism in this nation is maybe one that isn't as politically fraught as we might think it is.
So you talk about meaning, purpose, identity, connection, and then how Donald Trump has captured that, and that whatever you think of MAGA, it's a movement that's given people exactly that. So why do you think that's working for MAGA and not for the Democratic Party, and how could it work for the Democratic Party?
So one of the things I talk about in this book is my worry that the right, over the last decade, but probably longer, has done a much better job than the left in understanding the metaphysical state of the nation, the emotional state of the nation. And I'll give you an example of how Trump does understand the way that people are feeling. So what is all of his rhetoric and policy about the border and tariffs about? Yes, some of it is about jingoism and xenophobia and irresponsible nationalism. But what he's really talking about is power, where he's talking about these phenomenon that you thought we had no control over: migration, outsourcing. And he's saying no, we're going to take control of these phenomena that looked like they were outside of our control. We're going to put up a wall, and we're going to decide who comes into this country and who doesn't. We're going to level tariffs on the goods that are coming into this country. We're going to be powerful again in keeping jobs in this country. Now, his policies are reckless. They don't actually work. But he's speaking in terms of power, exercising power, giving the government power, giving people power again. And I think the Democrats just have to understand that that's the conversation that people want us to have. And we tend to be too technocratic. Our solutions tend to be too small. They don't really measure up to the problems that people are facing. As dumb and as reckless as his solutions are, they're big. And when people hear them, they actually seem matched to the problems that they are seeing and the powerlessness that they feel in their life.
Yeah, it makes me think of like just a sense of agency that we want to feel as individuals, and then we want to feel that our vote matters, right? That if we're participating in the electoral process, that makes a difference, and that matters. I want to stick with the Dems for a second, and just, you've said that the party tent is too small, and ideological purity tests drive away persuadable voters. And as you just said, we refuse to pick big fights. The left has never fully grappled with the wreckage of 50 years of neoliberalism, and we're out of touch. So how, to kind of take that idea that the ideological purity tests and that our tent is too small, what do you need to do as Democratic Party to change that ahead of the presidential election?
Yeah, this book is not really a book about political analysis. It's really a book about diagnosing this underlying rot and anxiety in the country, and making the case that there's a lot of bridges to be had. But yes, there's some advice for Democrats in this book. I cannot help myself at this moment. And one of my pieces of advice is to build a bigger tent, and that's a controversial at times suggestion, because I am saying we should be willing to bring people into the Democratic Party or even nominate candidates who don't agree with us on all of our most significant social, cultural, hot-button issues. But here's what I imagine. I imagine a party that is primarily focused or has as its tent poles unrigging a rigged economy so that you are powerful in the economy, so that you have agency in the economy, and unrigging a rigged democracy in which you also don't have power because the billionaires and the corporations have all the power. Again, making people feel like they have agency and purpose because the economy is now going to work for them again, not just the elites, and the democracy will listen to them again, not just the elites. And my thought is that if people sign up for those two projects, we should let them in. And that will allow us to win more elections because we'll be less judgmental of people who don't think the same thing we think on climate or guns or abortion. But it actually will give us a chance to convert them. Because if they get in the tent based upon an agreement on, say, raising the minimum wage or getting big money out of politics, well, then I got a chance to talk to you about how gay kids are actually not to blame for the problems that your son is experiencing in your school. And so we should be in the business of conversion. It's really hard to convert when you keep your tent deliberately small because you apply all these litmus tests and say you don't get in unless you agree with us on all 12 of our priorities.
Yeah. So one of your cults is a cult of credentialism. Can you explain that and then explain if there's a connection to what you just talked about?
Yeah, there is. It's a good segue. So chapter 5, I think, is the cult of credentialism. So what does that mean? Maybe the most significant divide in the country right now is the divide between people who have college degrees and people who don't. And it's a cruel divide because we live in an economy now where the college degree or some advanced degree is more necessary than ever. The college wage premium is higher than it's ever been before, the separation in income between somebody that has a college degree and somebody who doesn't. Okay, it's more important to have it than ever before, but it's more difficult to attain than ever before. And that mismatch is a humiliation to the people who can't afford the degree. And it is just true, whether we like it or not, we do kind of sort people based upon whether they have the degree or not, we assign a greater degree of worth to people who have the college degree. That's why some jobs that definitely don't need a college degree still require one, because we just think a person might be better if they have a college degree. That's not true, but that divide is really pushing us into two Americas. And so and it's why Donald Trump went right after the universities as soon as he got elected, because he knew there was all of this anger, rightful anger, at our system of education, in particular, our very inaccessible system of elite education. And so he goes right after Columbia and Harvard, and he has a lot of people cheering him in that effort. It doesn't help anybody to just punish those universities, but our party doesn't have big enough ideas. Frankly, our ideas, have kind of been, we'll just make your loans cheaper or we'll forgive your loans. And people are like, but that's not the problem. The problem is that the price is too high, that the whole enterprise is too inaccessible. We have to have bigger ideas to get more people into higher education, to reform higher education, so that not every degree is 4 years and so expensive. And if we start to bridge that gap, if more people have access to that credential, then the primary division that feeds our politics, the division between who has a degree and doesn't, starts to become less acute.
You write in the book that 35% of a one-year salary is the annual income for middle-class people. 35% of their income is 1 year of college. Yeah. So it's simply not affordable.
And listen, as you know, young people are really starting to question whether the degree is worth it at all. And it's not an illogical question for young people to ask. This idea that you should have to spend $400,000 to get the credential is absurd. And we should be doing some pretty radical things to force colleges to drive down that cost. And we're just not, in part because we've bought into the idea that really expensive 4-year credential is a means to sort people into two camps. We need to get over that.
I mean, and look at the trades and look at other ways that people can earn meaningful work. I work with college students every day, and there's a tremendous amount of anxiety about AI and what that's going to mean for their economic futures. And, the cult of technology is one that you write about a lot. And, you have this, awful story, the case of Sewell Setzer, who's a teenager who fell in love with an AI chatbot, and he died by suicide, which really illustrates the human cost. But can you and then I actually have a quote that I'd like to quote you from a famous Chicagoan who says, quote, "We wish to engage in dialogue with all men and women of our time with whom we share in the events, questions, and aspirations of humanity, and that technology can alleviate humanity's sufferings and open new possibilities, but it must not deny the essence of humanity, which is our capacity for relationship and love." And that was the Pope in his encyclical last week. Yeah. So when I read the Pope, I was wondering, did he ghostwrite your book?
I know.
Because there was so much that was
I called him up and I was like, if you're going to put out this encyclical, do it this week. So.
My book drops. No. So talk to us about...
So awful. I take that back.
As a Catholic. So talk to us about, how you've engaged with, I guess, the AI companies, which you have, but really what this means for our generation of young people who are, feeling very despairing about what this means for their futures.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I approach this first as a parent of teenagers who are growing up in this very uncertain world, and I have watched as this generation has retreated from in-person connection and into their phones, and we are living through the consequence of that. I also, have conversations with my 17-year-old and his friends as they have no idea what jobs are even going to be left when they graduate college. They don't know what degrees to pursue because the machines may have taken over everything. And so, yes, this is maybe the most important conversation happening in the country today, but I think we would get it wrong if we only had this conversation through the prism of job destruction or income destruction. And this is why the Pope's encyclical is so interesting, but really it's what this chapter, The Cult of Technology, is about. It's about forcing us to ask a deeper question. What happens to humanity when we decide to outsource basic human functions, conversation, friendship, critical thinking, to machines? What rot occurs in our soul? What societal disintegration will happen when we no longer do the things that have made us human? And so the conversation we need to have is a really, really hard one. I gave a speech or a commencement address last weekend that I was sort of loosely titled "In Defense of Inefficiency," making the case that we should preserve inefficiency because it's often good. And if we just optimize everything, we will turn it all over to the machines. Friendship is really inefficient. It is. Your friends are great, but sometimes they let you down. Sometimes they confound you. Sometimes they waste your time. And so Sam Altman says, well, I can do it better. I can create a machine that never lets you down, that always tells you what you think, that is never not there to answer your call. That would be our spiritual death. And it should cause us to have this broader conversation about what functions like friendship that we want to preserve. So I'll just end here. I give you some policy prescriptions in this book. One of them is that we should ban the use of friendship bots for every teenager in this country,
Yes.
to give them a shot at learning the skills of friendship building so that they have them ready when they become adults. That's just a decision we should make, that there are certain capacities the machines should not steal from us.
100% agree. Obviously, the cult of corruption is not one that we would be surprised that you would talk about. And it is something that you are, talking about all the time, actually, on social media and in Congress. Can you explain what that has done to our ideas of common good and what you're doing to address it?
So it'll appear to you in the book as kind of an odd chapter because everything else is, the cult of profit, of consumption, of technology, things that definitely, have a positive aspect to them. And I explain why our feelings about those subjects have gone kind of off the rails. But of course, there's nothing good about corruption. So what do I mean about the cult of corruption? I mean this. That chapter explores the question of why there isn't more outrage today at the bananas, nuclear-grade corruption that is happening inside this administration, right? I mean, he got away with so much over this last year that last week he was like, what if I just dipped my hand into the treasury and pulled out $1.8 billion and gave it to myself? And he's like, could I do that? Right? Could I get away with that? Would Republicans say anything about it? And, the judgment is a little bit still out on whether he's going to get away with it, but he just might. And the question is why, right? Why did the governor of my state 20 years ago go from 70% popularity to 20% popularity overnight because he had a state contractor build him a hot tub, a degree of corruption that seems lovely and quaint compared to this level of corruption. And today we're like, $1.8 billion, should we do something about that? Okay, here's my argument. And I might, yes, the answer is correct. The answer is yes. But here's my argument, and this is, again, why I'm trying to say it's not all about Trump. He's the main problem. He's the main character. But how did we get here? You got to ask that question. My argument, and you can decide if I'm right or not, is this, that when we live in an economy in which the winners take all, right, the titans, the CEOs and the owners, just grab for themselves everything, right? We went overnight from an economy where the average CEO made 60 times the average worker to 900 times, where table scraps are left for the rest of us. When that's okay, when a good company is a company that makes their CEO a trillionaire, well then, what's wrong if the winner in our politics just grabs everything for himself, takes everything available, and leaves the table scraps? If it's okay to be unconscionably greedy in our economy, isn't it okay in our politics as well? Maybe we look the other way at Trump's corruption because we've just normalized that kind of corruption in our economy. And so my argument is that if you inject a degree of modesty into the CEO class, if you require them to grab less of the output of this country and leave more of it for workers, maybe that would also increase our intolerance for the kind of corruption that happens in the public sector. There's a connection between what happens in our economy and what happens in our government.
And Senator Murphy, how do you do that?
Yeah, and so how do you do that? And that's, so inside the chapter on the cult of corruption and cult of profit is suggestions on how you build a capitalism of the common good, a common good capitalism. I don't actually think the choice is between market fundamentalism and socialism. I think you can build a different kind of capitalism that just cares about workers more, that spreads productivity gains more. Elizabeth Warren has a great bill that, that sets up a different corporate governance structure whereby boards have to have workers as part of the board. They have to have community members as part of the board. What if we supersize the power and membership of unions in this country so that more people have access to collective bargaining and can hold corporations accountable? What if we decided to have a really concentrated, powerful antitrust capability and just say there's a size that companies get that are way too big? So there are ways that you can construct a common good capitalism in which we, put it this way, we want a lot more millionaires and fewer billionaires and trillionaires, that we want people to succeed. We want people to be able to make a fortune, but we don't want just a small handful of people to capture it all. I think that kind of capitalism would make it easier for us in the government sector side to have that intolerance that we should have for winner-take-all politics.
And are there others in your party, if not, is the majority of your party feel that way as well?
No, I think the majority of my party wants to build that common good capitalism. There are obviously democratic socialists in our party as well, who might go further than I would go, but yes, I think we are. But this then gets to the last chapter of the book, which is the culture of corruption. Here's the other piece of the story of the culture of corruption. It's not just Trump's corruption. It's not. The whole system is corrupt. And well, it's not true that Democrats are as corrupt as Trump and you're just seeing his corruption and you're not seeing our corruption. Our politics are bought by these big corporations and these billionaires. And well, it's a bigger problem on the right, it's a problem on the left too. And we, I think, have not had big enough solutions for the problems people face, in part because those status quo elite entities in our economy have their hooks into both parties. So I want the Democratic Party to be really revolutionary in the way that it calls for the eradication of big money in our politics. For instance, being for a constitutional amendment to eradicate billionaire, corporate, and anonymous money from our politics. And I'll just be honest, I don't know that the party has made a collective decision yet to prioritize the unrigging of our democracy in the way that I would like it to.
We have I'm going to just intersperse audience questions because this one is relevant to what you just said. Clark Hall asks, with nearly $35 million spent on a recent state election, how would you reduce the influence of big money in campaigns so everyday representatives, not just the ultra-wealthy or establishment candidates, can realistically run for office?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think about this all of the time. I remember midway through my first House race, I was a long shot candidate for the House of Representatives, the Congress in 2006. I was running against the longest serving member of Congress in Connecticut's history. And I was, calling people for $100, $50 at a time. I'd run through all my friends, and so now I was calling strangers. And, it was the worst thing I'd ever done in my life. I hated it. And I remember walking to my little tiny campaign office early in that campaign, stopping in the middle of the road, and considering turning back around and going back to my law office and canceling my campaign because I just couldn't go through the indignity of raising all of this money. And so the money in politics is not just about the influence that the powerful people get. It's also about the disincentive structure for regular people to enter if they have to go through this exercise of begging and begging and begging for money. I think we do need a constitutional amendment, I really do. Now, Connecticut has a system of campaign finance reform. We have a public financing system. That helps to a degree, but you have to get the big money out, or else these AI companies, these crypto companies will capture policy. And I think that maybe not under Donald Trump, but in the post-Trump world, which hopefully will be sooner rather than later, there will be support on the right as well. The right is also, I mean, the grassroots right is sick of this corporate control of our government, and I think that there might be an appetite for a constitutional amendment like that in the broader public in a post-Trump world.
I'm going to go to audience Q&A in a minute. I have another question, which is, you know, your book kind of reads like a job description, which is a politics of meaning, working class dignity, moral clarity, and a willingness to challenge your party's own assumptions. What does the 2028 nominee need to be?
Well, I think the 2028 nominee has to understand this spiritual atrophy that has happened in the country and speak directly to it, to use terms like loneliness, right? To talk about their policies giving power back to people, to not be afraid to talk about the benefit of community, of rebuilding broken communities. This party always has been, and the left generally has been, at our best when we talk in spiritual terms, right? That's Martin Luther King Jr., that's right. RFK. And I'd like us to get back to a conversation that lifts people up and talks, God forbid, about happiness, right? Talks about the things that actually make for a happy life, and that our politics should serve a pursuit of happiness. So I certainly have a longer list than that of what the 2028 nominees should do, but I want our politics to be spiritually grounded. I want our politics to be grounded in the emotional state of the country. I want our party to be less technocratic than we have been.
Is there anybody on this stage that you think fits that bill? It's not me. Are you considering running in 28?
No one. No, I mean, I honestly don't know what I will do, but I have been encouraged, frankly, that a couple of my friends in politics who I know are definitely running for president in 2028 have called me just in the last couple of days, or rather texted me in the last couple of days since this book came out and said, boy, you know, really, this does seem like a language that we can access to use in this election and the next election. So to the extent that this book has some influence, that would be great. But no, I don't know what I'll do. My goal right now is to just raise the stakes and raise up this mission set, that it's not good enough to beat him, that we've got to engage in this deeper cultural change work as well.
Thank you for that. Yeah. Mark Atkins asks, to reverse Trump's destruction of the federal workforce and institutions, there have been discussions of the Democrats not simply rebuilding, but building back better. Do you agree with it? And if so, what are some examples?
Yeah, of course, I think about this all the time. Yes, we are going to have to rebuild all of these capacities that he has stripped down, but we're going to have to do it differently and better. I mean, certainly I think a lot about the world, and well, we certainly have to rebuild development aid for the world. It is true that so that's worth clapping for, rebuilding our capacity to save lives. We should do it we should rebuild foreign aid in a much more strategic way. It is true that that agency ended up getting too scattered, that they were doing little things in too many places, and they weren't ultimately making big differences. And so we are going to have to be more targeted and strategic. But again, I want us to not just be in the business of rebuilding the stuff that he broke. I want us to build new things. I do. And so one of the proposals I have in this book is for a big new thing. It's not an original idea, but I think it's time for us to talk about a dramatic way to help rebuild the selflessness muscle that exists in our body that is atrophied, as we have been taught that the only thing that really matters is our own material success and achievement, as the influencer culture has taught us that the only thing that matters is your own individual performance to the world. Isn't it time maybe to think about universal, mandatory public service in this country? It's a hard thing. It's a thing that has never existed in this country. In draft time, we got close to it. But if everybody in their young years had a chance to give back to their community, wouldn't they find out that they love it? Not everyone would, but many people would feel such joy at giving back, maybe for the first time in their life in a meaningful way. Maybe they would make that choice more often in their adulthood. Maybe they'd find that they were happier because they had made that choice. But because so many young people don't get that opportunity, because we've told you that you better start on your career immediately, you better just focus on income and your material success, we don't get that opportunity. To give young people the gift of the endorphins that rush through your body that are much more permanent than those that come with upgrading your iPhone, that come from service. And so I want us to build back the things that he broke in a better way, but I also want us to build some brand new, wonderful, and lovely things.
Well said. Shelley Fula asks, Senator Murphy, you're asking people to believe in the common good at a moment when many of them, including a lot of people in this room, are tired. Not apathetic, tired. What do you say to the person who's been showing up for decades, who still believes, but who genuinely doesn't know what showing up is supposed to look like right now?
Yeah, I mean, I'm tired a lot of days too. I am. I know how that feels. I think it is tired. It is tiring and exhausting to live in a country that sends these signals that all that matters is consumption and material achievement and profit. I think if we ultimately build a nation that is more communitarian, a nation where you feel like there's a net around you, not a social, not a net of government benefits, that we should strengthen that net, but a net of community, I think it'll be a less exhausting country to live in. I had this story told to me the other day by a reporter who was interviewing Yemeni refugees to the United States, literally fleeing a war-torn country. And one of these refugees said in response to a question, well, how do you like it being, here in the United States, having left this miserable war-torn nation? And he said, I don't like it. He's like, I don't like it. Back home, even if we hit hard times, there was a neighborhood and a community to catch us. Here in America, if I fall, I kind of have the feeling that nobody will catch me. And that's because we live in a world where you might not even know the name of your neighbor, where you're so rushed every day that you don't spend the time to get to know the people around you. I think it'll feel less exhausting if we build a more communitarian nation. So that's in part what this book is in service of. There's another answer to that, and maybe I'll save it for later. But
no, give it to us quickly.
Okay, give it to you quickly. Well, okay, so you know what? This is supposed to be hard. This is supposed to be hard.
Yeah.
What we have built in this country over the last 250 years is a miracle. It is a miracle. It is a country that is multicultural and multi-ethnic and multi-religious, the greatest experiment, right, in bringing people together that are different from each other in the history of the world. And we self-govern. we decide for ourselves what the rules are. There's literally no society in the history of the world that has done both those things together at the same time for as long as we have. And both those things are unnatural. They are, right? 0.1% of human beings have lived in a democracy because it's easier just to put one person in charge. Living with people that are different from you, it's unnatural. We biologically retreat to tribe. So this is fragile. This is hard. And so I get it that it feels exhausting, but it is, whether we like it or not, the price of living in this unique society is that we all have to work, sometimes to the point of exhaustion, to protect it. And so I wake up these days with that exhaustion, that tiredness, that anger, that anxiety, but I also wake up almost every day with a feeling of concurrent joy that I'm alive in the greatest experiment in societal organization in the history of the world, at a moment when it's under siege, when I can do something about it. And I wrote this book because the mission set is enormous: win the elections and also reform the culture. But I feel that it is a great gift to be alive at a moment when we can save it and then tell our kids and our grandkids the story of how we saved it.
I'm glad you gave that response, because that was like a mic drop moment. And I think, part of what, as you were talking, I was thinking, we have lost the joy in our patriotism and, really being proud of living in, I think, the best country in the world. And as I think, on the eve of or on the year of our 250th anniversary, in July, we'll be celebrating that. And because I work with Gen Z every day, and there's some Gen Alpha in the audience as well, your book really talks about recovering something for them that they never really had. And so, and we're really lucky. We were part of Gen X, which I think is the best generation. Yes, okay, a lot of Gen Xers in the audience. But so...
Cosign.
What do you say to a 19-year-old who looks at this country at 250 and they're not fully sure they can participate in the American dream? What is your message to them?
Well, I mean, it is a reflection of what I just said, which is that there is nothing given to us in this country. Everything is earned, including the protection of our democracy. But I also say this: what a time to be stepping into adulthood right now. You are not powerless. In fact, you are going to make some of the most fundamental decisions about the structure of democracy and the future of these technologies. And so, as fraught as it feels to be a young person stepping into this moment, here's what I know about American history. No great social change movement in this nation's history has ever not been led by young people. Right? The great changes in our history, from the anti-war movement to the progressive era, were led by young people. You have a moral authority that no one else has. And so at this moment when we're wrestling, what we're going to do with AI to protect us spiritually and protect us economically, how are we going to save this democracy? If young people choose, as they have generation after generation, to lead, and to not just feel miserable that the adults are failing them, there is magic in that leadership. And there is all sorts of history telling you that in league with a handful of adults who want to help, that you aren't powerless, that you, in fact, are maybe at this moment in your life more powerful than you will ever be in your future. So I hope that more people young people feel the power that they have.
That is beautiful. Yeah, you should clap for that. Just the last word is that this is an audience of doers. Again, they wouldn't be here on a beautiful spring evening if they weren't. And so if we wanted them to walk out of here with a call to action, other than to buy the book, as you should, what is that in a highly concrete way that makes us feel like we're doing something?
Yeah, okay, so I will foot stomp, buy the book. So obviously, this book is primarily about what our politics has to do to meet this moment, what our politics has to do to create a common good capitalism and to reform our democracy so that people feel powerful and to give people a sense of citizenship as their primary role in America rather than just consumption. And so it is not a moment that you can sit on the sidelines politically, and I imagine most people are here because you are already engaged, and no matter how exhausting and tiring it is, this is the price of admission, especially at a moment like this filled with such peril. And just remember that Trump's entire strategy, his entire method of operation is to convince you to give up, is to try to exhaust you, is to try to overwhelm you so that you just decide, you know what, I'd be better off tending to my garden or focusing on my grandkids. You can do all of that, but don't let him win. Stay active, involved in the political theater. But it is not just about politics. It is about all the individual choices we make in our life. In that speech to the kids at Wesleyan, I said, choose inefficiency in your life. Choose to stand in the line to get your coffee instead of ordering it ahead of time. Just see what happens in that line, who you might meet. Say hello to the barista. Develop a relationship with that person. When you get into the Uber, don't press no conversation. Don't optimize your time and check your emails. Talk to the guy. Find out how his day is. Ask for a recommendation on the local restaurant that he likes. Inefficiency is to be prized, and we can all make decisions in our life to just slow down and to value things other than maximization. I end the book, if we're wrapping up, I'll tell the last story that I tell in the book. I end the book with a really personal story.
I love this story. This is my favorite story of the book.
So I end the book with a really personal story. So last Thanksgiving, I was home that morning in Hartford alone. It was the first Thanksgiving after my wife and I had separated. And so she was with my 2 sons in Washington, and I was in Hartford, going to join family later that day, but I was alone, and I was not feeling great alone. And I was doing what you probably would expect I was doing. I was sitting on my phone, scrolling, and increasingly feeling worse and worse. But I remembered that normally on Thanksgiving morning, there was this family, this local family, that would set up a card table on the little public green space that's near my house in the south end of Hartford. And I thought, well, why don't I go check out what they're doing? Why don't I go, they set up a card table to hand out donuts and coffee to the homeless on the green every Thanksgiving morning. So I went to the Dunkin' Donuts and I picked up a couple of gift cards to bring to their table, and I went over and I just sat with them for, I don't know, not that long, 30 minutes, an hour, and I helped them hand out coffee, and I started conversations with the people who live in my neighborhood. And I just sort of slowly felt my spirits just lifting and lifting and lifting. It was this small thing I had done. I had left my house. I had walked to the green. I had participated in this little act of service that others were leading, and I was just being a bit player in. And it just was this reminder to me of how good it feels to join, of how good it feels to be part of giving back, of how that is an essential part of happiness, how in our DNA is an instinct to live for the common good, not just to live for ourselves. And we can model that behavior for others. We can choose to stop scrolling, walk out that door, throw a block party this summer for your neighborhood, shop at the local store rather than the chain store. There are all sorts of little actions that we can take. And at a really hard, vulnerable moment in my life, it was connection, and in particular, connection with acts of selflessness that lifted me up. And I end the book with that because, yeah, politics is important, and maybe it's more important now than ever before. But so are the little things that we can do to live lives of common good, to serve examples for others of investment in the common good. That's, in the end, a big part of the story about how you address this crisis of the common good.
Thank you. Yes, please join me in thanking Senator Murphy for being with us tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.